The town may be kind of small, but these folks have big smiles and big hearts, and they know what it is to have simple fun down our way, where old-fashioned singing and homey gatherings make living mighty pleasant.
When he was in grad school and Yesterday came out, he like heard it on the radio, went to a record store and said, "I'd like to buy the song Yesterday." And they said, "Oh, by the Beatles." And he said, "No." Like he just thought all they did was scream. So,
Keep rolling.
Welcome to Abandoned Albums, the documentary podcast where we take a closer look at some albums that may have been forgotten about over time, some albums you might not even know existed, and some albums by up-and-coming artists we think you should know about. I'm your host, Keith R. Higgins, and joining me is my partner in crime, Jeff Calhoun.
Thank you for inviting me back again, Keith. This is my favorite night of the week, recording Abandoned Albums.
On this episode of Abandoned Albums, Jeff and I welcome Glen Phillips of Toad the Wet Sprocket into Thunder Love Studio.
The paper doesn't give many details. Tell me about this.
Rex Stardust, lead Electric Triangle with Toad the Wet Sprocket, has had to have an elbow removed following their recent successful worldwide tour of Finland.
Paul is making me nervous. Paul is making me scared. Walking to this room and he swaggers like he's God's own messenger. Change the name of my brother. Change the things that he said. Says that he speaks to him, but he never even knew the man. I'd give my life for him, like water through my hands. You give them.
Let's clear the air early. We are not so dunderheaded as to think that Toad the Wet Sprocket's fear is in any kind of danger of being abandoned. Dulcinea, I mean, any of the first four records.
Yeah.
An episode like this is interesting. Like, I can listen to, like, Works Progress. I can listen to that back-to-back with Toad and find just as much enjoyment. The music is exceptional. And so I think it's fascinating that you can live on both sides of the musical spectrum.
He's got his solo work, Mutual Admiration Society with Sean and Sarah Watkins, Works Progress Administration with a bevy of superstars, in addition to Toad.
Oh, and the project he did with Garrison Starr, who I love. Talking to Glen Phillips is not... This conversation will not be a Toad the Wet Sprocket interview.
I think that was the interesting thing about researching this particular episode, is that this whole other avenue of Glen Phillips' creativity opened up for me. I'm like, whoa.
As tempting as it is to go through that list and be like, let's talk about Nightingale Song. All right, let's talk about Walk on the Ocean. But I'm more interested in getting to know the person a little bit better that wanted to work with Garrison Starr and wanted to work with Nickel Creek and wanted to work with, as you say, a bevy of diverse talent. It's like a treasure, a vault of treasure opened up to us. And isn't that what we do, Keith? Isn't that what Abandoned Albums is all about, is opening and sharing vaults of treasure with people?
I think it is, Jeff. And with that said, here is our conversation with Glen Phillips of Toad the Wet Sprocket. Welcome, Glen. This is amazing. I'm going to jump into it with a really simple question that I'm sure you've explained a bajillion times, but I don't really want the explanation.
it's from a Monty Python sketch.
It is. It is. I think Toad the Wet Sprocket opened up the door for people to use more unusual names, like Death Cab for Cutie.
Yeah, although that's a film reference, right? I believe Death Cab for Cutie, like Duran Duran, is an obscure film reference.
Weirdly, I know the Duran Duran one.
Well, and Toad the Wet Sprocket wasn't even original, right? It was out of a Monty Python sketch that was this list of terrible band names. So I think for us, even it was in lieu of having a name. We had a gig, we didn't have a name, and Dean, our bass player, was like, "Can we please call it Toad the Wet Sprocket? It would be hilarious." We just wanted to see it in print, like as an in joke. And then we'll come up with a name. Like, of course, that's not the name. That's like the filler until we get the cool name. And then it was like a year and we still didn't have a name we liked. And we kept trying to do something that would be cool. And that's apparently what we actually were, was a terrible band name from an obscure Monty Python sketch.
Have you ever had a chance to meet Eric Idle or any of the other guys to sort of...
No, I met John Cleese in passing.
Okay.
You know, he's a Santa Barbara guy. Have not had the pleasure of meeting Eric Idle.
You know, we're all generally around the same age. And I'm like, all right, well, that's a weird name for a band. And then I heard the DJ say, pardon me, my dog's excited. I heard the DJ say that it's from a Monty Python sketch. And I'm like, oh, well, all right then. And then I heard the music and I'm like, wow.
They're not funny.
And so my first impressions of Santa Barbara is that it is really nice. And I had kind of high expectations, but I thought that it was going to be more like city feeling, kind of like San Diego. I didn't realize that it was only 90,000 population, so it is a great size. A small city, but very quaint and beautiful.
Speaking with Marco a couple of weeks ago, he made an analogy that I thought was pretty apropos, in that the Santa Barbara scene at the time when you all were coming up closely resembled the CBGB scene in the mid 70s, in that there were so many artists of different genres sharing bills. You know, you could have a power pop band followed by a punk band followed by, you know, an acoustic set. Did you find that experience beneficial? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I loved the Santa Barbara scene, and it's not to say it wasn't entirely non-competitive. I know there were a few bands in town who had there was one band who actually had a song mocking us.
What?
At the beginning, it was like this jazz thing at the beginning. It was like, "Hey, we're Toad the Wet Sprocket." Like, but for about 98% of the scene, I mean, if you weren't doing like a pop cover thing, it was super open and super embracing. And, you know, and probably Marco mentioned some of the same venues, you know, of the Red Barn and Isla Vista. Bersodi's was still around. And then a little later, there was the Noise Chamber. Matt Ballesteros' place from This Ascension, you know, and so like as an example, the Noise Chamber, like I think Nirvana played there on the Bleach tour. It's a tiny little place that could fit probably 40 people, and the guy who owned it had a band called This Ascension that was kind of Santa Barbara's goth band, but like Creature Feature would play there, and you know, that like the punk band's the same with the Red Barn. The Red Barn was this like public place you could rent out in Isla Vista near UCSB, so city owned, and I forget, it didn't cost much to rent it out, so all the punk shows were there. It was all ages. There was no bar. And it would be a typical bill would be like 4 or 5 bands. And, you know, Santa Barbara was known for having this, like the gentle mosh pit. Like if you fell down, people would help you up. And like, you know, as that scene went, it was really, you know, a low key, sweet Santa Barbara thing. But you would have a goth band, and then you would have, oh God, I wish I could remember what their name. There was one band, it was like Infinite Reality or something. They were like Santa Barbara's Crass, like super, you know, political vegan, like that style of political, super moral punk. Then you would have Lost Kittens, you would have like on the same bill, and then we would play and the pit would stop and everybody would sit on the floor cross-legged and listen. And then the next band would come on and everybody would get up and mosh again. And it would just,
wow.
It was really wonderfully supportive. Everybody just like supported each other. Even years, like we never played with Snot, but I remember it was, in Chicago and met, like Lynn Strait from Snot, it's like, and was like, man, you guys are great. I loved seeing it. Like just Santa Barbara bands stuck together. It was a great scene.
And it's nice to hear the camaraderie and the.
Well, there weren't enough of us to fight. It might have been different if we were like, I mean, this is another thing. It's not like we were clawing to get somewhere, right? It was before, there was still more live music, less DJs. There weren't cell phones. There weren't, if you wanted to go see music, you'd go see music. And young people went out and saw music all the time. Nobody was making a dime. Nobody cared about making a dime. Nobody was trying to get anywhere. We just loved playing music. And I feel like the whole scene kind of had that attitude. And there were these crazy bands. There's this guy, the most wonderful guy, Kurt Metzler, and he had these band called Deadbeat. Sometimes it was Boo. I think it was originally Boo, and then it was Deadbeat. And the lineup was Angus Cook playing. Angus Cook, who's like mixed more, like I think he mixed most of the Fat Records catalog. Like he's a legendary punk rock mixer. Always wears like an Aloha shirt and plays the cello. He was on cello. It was cello, Hofner bass, pipe organ sounds on a little keyboard, and all songs about like monsters, and like the influence was basically like the song from the Disney Haunted House. Like that's the keystone kind of song that they played, and it was these hilarious spooky monster songs. And once again, they'd play a gig and guys from Creature Feature, who was like the local Metallica, Giancarlo, and like they would be there, and Toad would be there, and like it was a really fun scene.
That's cool
to hear Marco describe it. You guys, especially you as a very young musician, here's Glenn as a high school freshman. You guys fit right in those scenes. He said he described Toad as a very indie rocker look in your early formative days.
Yeah, we were the mopey kids. One of my kids actually just found some tape of us playing in town like in 86 or something. And, I had, my hair was down to here. I like half the show. I'm just like this, I'm like Cousin It. Like with my hair completely covering my face so you couldn't see me, swaying back and forth, kind of moaning dejectedly. But I think it fit in,
How did it go over with your kid? Did they give you crap about it?
Actually, they said, "Dad, you were so cute. You guys were great." Like,
oh, that's great.
It was very sweet. But it was, I think this was also at a time, it was also before college music went mainstream. So like Losing My Religion hadn't happened yet. Right. And so bands, the bands that really influenced us, like, Husker Du, The Replacements, REM, U2, they sound far apart right now. Like if you say U2 and Husker Du, it's like, well, they were both around the same time maybe, but they were even in the same world. I mean, this was before U2 had hits. It was before, they were this scrappy band out of Ireland. And there was so much music that kind of came out of punk, but was taking this more, songwritery attitude. I mean, the Replacements, right? Just incredible songs. And as punk, was splintering into something that was like really harder and a little further from like the songwriting roots of original, like first wave Clash. And, it's like different kinds of bands happening, but none of it had reached the mainstream yet. Mm-hmm. It all kind of fit together, Mm-hmm. It didn't matter that it didn't sound the same. It all kind of was outsider art still.
We grew up with so many different musical movements, soft rock, disco, punk, into college rock, and it all gets filtered down. And to your point, the Replacements is without a doubt my favorite band. When I hear Something's Always Wrong, I think it's Kissing Cousin is Unsatisfied. Thematically, they're both the same songs, and it's really interesting to have all of these things swirling around in your head. I presume you listened to a lot of music growing up, and comes out that way. I don't even think I have a question there, but I think it's really fascinating. I think it's really fascinating.
Nice one, Keith.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting to think about all the stuff that we had growing up, and then the creativity and the art that came from it. I think is really fascinating. Yeah,
it was. I think a really open, poignant time. I mean, there was so much. There was a lot of music, and once again, before it became enough of a commodity to be, narrowed and filtered into something smaller than what it was. I mean, that was the thing. I was buying, I was a Cocteau Twins fanatic, and there's no. I think there were certain individuals. I remember a kid in town who was like, he really couldn't decide if he was a mod or a rocker, and it was really hurting. He didn't know which way to go. But there are people who really want to fit in with a very specific scene, or just identify with it so much that it's their entire life, and they don't really want to go out of it. Or it's an identity, right? Like rockabilly guys who are like, man, they can appreciate other music, but I'm a rockabilly dude. That's what I am. And you kind of, and I think there's also a bit of that at that time, because you couldn't afford to have a hugely broad musical taste. You had to buy a handful of records, and maybe you could cassette copy your friends' records. You didn't have the catalog of every song ever played at your fingertips. And we forget how precious every record was. And that if you got a new REM record and it was disappointing, you would continue to play it and play it and play it until you either got it or decided it was a hopeless case and you returned it. And, there's that thing of sticking with your artists, and, you couldn't afford not to invest in the music you brought home. But, which is not to say though that it still wasn't broad. I was obsessive about 4AD album covers, all the Envelope 23 designs, and anything that Envelope 23 designed, I had to have, just because it looked so cool. Having all my Cocteau Twins records and throwing muses, and but there was some awesome music in there.
There was.
I find a lot of people that get the bug that really intensely love music. There's usually someone in their youth that is an enabler, somebody that's feeding you good records. For me, it was my dad, giving me Ventures records at age 8. Here's Run DMC's self-titled album. Check this out. Was there someone in your youth that was an enabler for you that maybe guided your music taste?
Yeah, it would have been my brother. I mean, my parents, my mom, she liked Joan Baez and Israeli folk music. And my dad was really into Benny Goodman. And he liked big band and Simon and Garfunkel. The only record he ever bought that was technically a rock record was Dire Straits' first record. Yeah, he liked Dire Straits. That was as rock as he would get.
Not a bad choice.
Not a bad choice, but he apparently when he was in grad school and Yesterday came out, he heard it on the radio, went to a record store and said, "I'd like to buy the song Yesterday," and they said, "Oh, by the Beatles." And he said, "No," he just thought all they did was scream. So music I got less, and we had a lot of show tunes. My brother was the one who was a Beatles fanatic. He got me into good music. And at the same time, I think the first music that really hit me, I mean, the first 2 records I ever bought were Muppet Movie soundtrack and the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. And I was obsessed with disco. You go into the history of the disco sucks movement, and it was, if you look back at it historically, the disco sucks movement was about racism and homophobia.
100%. I 100% agree with that.
The main attraction, the disco demolition, spearheaded by morning radio man Steve Dahl and his anti-disco army. Earlier, I asked Steve just what he has against disco.
Well, the first thing I have against it is that I can never find a white three-piece suit that fits me off the rack. So I hate the taste of pina coladas. I'm allergic to gold jewelry, so there's nothing there for me.
4 fans were injured during the melee, 40 others arrested. But you're not taking responsibility for what happened.
I don't think I have to.
Disco was an amazing melting pot. And I remember as a kid, like, who always felt like really insecure, and like I just wanted to feel free, and like I could, like, my insecure, like, to feel free to be myself for all my weirdness and be loved and be seen. And disco was like utopian for me. Yeah. And I took on the disco sucks thing. I took my disco records out in the back and like shot them up with a BB gun and hung my sister's sledge with like BB holes. It didn't work very well, but like, and got into metal because metal was supposed to be cool. And hey man, Ozzy's fucking great. And Rush taught me how to listen to lyrics and this and that. You know, going back to like Earth, Wind and Fire and Kool and the Gang, the Bee Gees, that stuff is so fucking great.
Yeah.
That was amazing music. And I had it basically shamed out of me by bigots. And yeah. And I regret that. I think the thing to listen to, disco was lyrically a poor genre. It was, clams on the half shell and roller skates. It's like not, it was an era of dance music that was, it was decidedly about dance. It was decidedly about a groove. But it was also like arrangementally, like a kind of amazing time. Like people were still making big sounding records, the string sections, the horns, the incredible bass playing, any genre ever for bass. Disco is like absolutely the best. Like the percussive and rhythmic side of it. And if you listen to those records, they are exquisitely arranged. Everything that's going on is crystal clear, fits together like beautiful clockwork. Like it's really exquisitely done music, and especially with the best of the best. But yeah, Earth, Wind and Fire, Kool and the Gang, holy crap. Chic. Well, Nile Rodgers. I mean, God, I was talking with some people earlier today, and was I'll do the name drop. Was on it was a MS Drive for a podcast called Dystopia Tonight with John Pavaromo. And he had on Stephen Page and Tal Bachman and Ken Block. So
wow.
We ended up talking for a while about Nile Rodgers and just how influential he is. I mean, how amazing Chic was. And that, like, Good Times as Well was also Bob Clearmountain's first major mix.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that. Oh, wow.
Yeah, early Clearmountain, right? So listen to it again and you're like, I see. And then Nile Rodgers is a producer who, like, you think of the things he touched and elevated and brought to the next level, and like left his mark on, but also not in a way that was domineering. He was an astonishingly influential producer, and like his continued relevance is kind of amazing and impact. Like, what a fucking master.
Fall. her life, she hates her skin, she even hates her friends. Just to hold on to all the reputation she can't mend. And there's some chance he could fail, but the last time someone's always there for baby. When will we fall? When will we fall down? Then jump back, gotta get out of here into the
Your career spans such a huge swath. There's almost like a bell curve to it, where Toad from 91 through, let's call it 97, I mean, you're selling millions of records. You're enjoying lots of success. Your songs are celebrated. I kind of want to skip past that and talk about some of the other experiences.
The sad years.
Well, I don't see them as sad years because the music is so darn good. There was a time in the Toad career where it almost seems like there's a line of demarcation where, I don't know if it was in the late 90s or the early 2000s, where, you know, there was a breakup, you decided that you weren't going to pursue that anymore. And it seems like where you went out of that was embracing a lot of diversity in terms of your collaborators and your styles. You kind of went away from, I don't want to have to sound like any one thing. I'm going to experiment a lot.
Yeah, you could say that. There's also a lack of focus in there. I mean, I think I tried really hard to get a record deal after Toad broke up. I couldn't get a record deal. I was despondent. I had, 2 kids. I had lost my career by age 27. Was unsignable, was incredibly, had a massive full-on nervous breakdown right around the turn of the century. I was playing a lot at Largo, this club in Los Angeles, and the community in there really helped. It was at a time, Ben Folds described it as the time when the major labels scrubbed for talent and, started dropping people like Glen Phillips, Amy Mann, and there was, all these kind of newly homeless, like, what happened? Musicians were hanging out at Largo. That really buoyed me during that time. And I met Nickel Creek. So met Ethan Johns, who recorded the Abulum record. And the Abulum record was a definite, fuck you to commercialism.
I want to see you sometime. Can find me out, be home. Just between the Costco and the Barnes & Noble. Behind the mom and pop grocery that shut down in the 90s. Like all the other locals, they smashed the dreams of the hopeful. I'm getting off track, sorry. So like I said right in there, it was a Frederick Myers. Sold everything from fruit to tires. Check in with the doorman, an old biker named Slim. Say you're here to see me, don't forget to tip him. One hand must wash the other, each man must be a brother. Band up and take cover, we'll go dancing, set fires, tag buildings, sap tigers, drive go-karts like Shriners, just hang out with Fred Myers. We'll bring a lantern with you, it gets dark in places.
With Compass Records, the label I just put out my new record on, they also did a re-release of my previous record, Swallowed by the New. That's the first time I've worked with the same team for 2 albums in a row in 20 years.
Wow.
Every album was kind of starting from scratch again.
Yeah.
But at the same time, part of that diversity, I met Nickel Creek, randomly, they were playing at a folk festival, and a friend of mine was being a guitar tech there, and he had a Toad the Wet Sprocket sticker, and Sean Watkins said, oh, I love Toad. I wrote a song that I dreamed he would sing. And my friend got us in touch, and I sang this song "Let It Fall" for Sean, and met the Nickel Creek guys. I just finished the record with Ethan. We did a record together called Mutual Admiration Society, toured together. Like, they really, I've given them credit for probably saving my life a few times, because they had such joy and energy and delight, and seeing the world through their eyes, getting to go on the tour with them. And they just wanted to play more music. We'd play, we'd finish a show, we'd go to the parking lot, and we'd play another hour and a half in the parking lot after the club had emptied. And they were so in love with music and so in love with life. And, you'd go, hey, there's a museum down the road. Like, let's look at a bookstore. Like, whereas the band had gone we did that thing rock bands do, where you just become blind to each other and blind to kind of the miraculous opportunity of traveling around and making music for a living, right? You take it for granted. So, and they were so good that just to play rhythm guitar and not ruin things was like the largest challenge I'd ever faced as a musician.
The super appropriately named Mutual Admiration Society. That's a wonderful record. I wonder of all the collaborations that you were doing, because I've got a timeline in front of me, and there's a lot happening for you between 2007, 2008, 2009. Mm-hmm. The Works Progress Administration collaboration seems like a really interesting project, and I would love to know where that came from. I think of all your side projects and collaborations, the project that you did with Garrison Starr is absolutely a Plover. A little bit tougher to find some of that music online.
Probably. Is it still?
It's tremendous. It is so wonderful. So, that's three groups that we've mentioned between Mutual Administration Society, Admiration Society, WPA, and then Plover.
Did you manage to find Remote Tree Children, also from the same period? Oh, yeah, that's an entire other band I had. That's the nerdiest one. It's ridiculous.
It's all, when you look at the personnel, they're all superstar groups. In 2008, you had a fairly serious injury. You fell through a coffee table and had some surgery. Mm-hmm. And the rumor was that you weren't sure if you were going to be able to play guitar. So with all of those different collaborations happening around that same era, and then here you have this massive injury, it's got to be an interesting time career-wise. You're pursuing so many different things, and then to have that happen, talk me through that.
Oh, the injury, I was actually at Sean's house, Sean Watkins, and he and Sarah were living together at the time, and they had this coffee table that had like a thick metal rim that people would sit on a lot. I thought my butt was on the rim. It turned out my butt was on the untempered glass behind it. And I went, what? And I just felt this hand go out, like switch, like zip. And so it's still like, if I try to bring my fingers together, I can't, I don't have lateral muscles. I can do this, but I can't close them together. That's me trying to do Spock. And it's still pins and needles from this side of this finger all through here. So it's better than it was. But I was supposed to actually leave on tour with Jonathan Brooke the next day. And had to cancel that. And I think I was back on the road in 6 months or something. Sean actually came out and backed me up. Had Jonathan Kingham, has been a great friend and collaborator for years and years. He's played keyboards in Toad. We've toured together a ton, and he also came out and played with me. And so I had a few years where I really needed to lean on other people to get through a set. Yeah, I'd been wanting to collaborate more, and somebody had told me, like, I'd said, well, I told the universe, like, I want to collaborate more, and I want a new challenge. I think I need to work against something, and I didn't, like, put any, like, disclaimers on that of, like, please without physical injury. So I got what I asked for. How can I say? I learned a lot from it, and there are both about asking for help, about resiliency, having to learn to play guitar again. We did the WPA record. When we recorded it, I had my hand. When we toured for it, I didn't. And we only got to do about 8 shows with the band that we recorded with. Then we ended up having a 5-piece version of it with Jerry Rowe on drums, Sebastian Steinberg on bass, and Luke Bulla, Sean, and myself. But it was, there was a lot of learning and having the hand. I mean, simply in terms of, like, I like opiates enough to know that I didn't want to ever get a refill on pain meds, and nerve damage doesn't feel good. And so I had about 1.5 years of kind of chronic pain, and just to learn to be present and breathe through it. I don't know. I think learning how to deal with chronic pain is a really great teacher. If you talk to people who do, like, really intense meditation or long meditation, half of the going to, like, a 10-day meditation retreat and sitting for 11 hours is that it's agonizing. And you learn to have a relationship with pain, that it will pass, and show up in the moment and distribute your awareness to where the pain is not the only thing. And there's a lot of presence, I think, that can be learned, especially if you're lucky enough to have chronic pain that eventually diminishes to mere discomfort. I think those lessons of resiliency are things you can call on a lot. I can call on the gratitude that I was injured only as far as I was.
Right.
I can, at any moment, if I'm taking things too seriously and want to remember that even my own perception of my body is just a bit of a construct, right? Like, I have this hand where, these fingers feel twice as large as they are. And so I can remember maybe not to take my thoughts quite so seriously, or not to take the stories I tell myself quite so seriously.
Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology. Better than he was before. Better, stronger, faster.
I want to ask a question about WPA.
Yeah,
that's a bold name for the band. I'm curious what prompted that, because it has such a legacy in American history, which I'm not going to go into. Kids, you can Google that on your own.
Well, it makes the band difficult to Google. You have to say band at the end of the Google search.
Yes, it does.
Yes.
But I'm curious, what was the motivation behind that?
I don't know. I'm trying to think of what discussions would have led to it being WPA.
I'm not here for your confession. We said all there is to say. This house was made of tinder, and we both set off the flames. I went wild in the wreckage. You were wandering off into the smoke. There shouldn't be a chance we could cut. Shouldn't be holding you so close, but I still see as you are. For for the tears beneath the scar. Kisses sweet and words so rough. You will always have my love.
Because it's this large creative collaboration, right? It was a whole bunch of people from really different worlds coming together, making something together. And
For sure.
that element of it felt good. It was kind of a classic band configuration. You know, there wasn't, you know, we cut that record in like 3 days. I think we did some background vote. We rehearsed for 2 or 3 days. We recorded the record in like 3 days. We just played it 8 people live. And, you know, once again, if you get like Benmont Tench and Greg Leese together, they just make room for you. Like, it's so fucking amazing to play with people like that. So I don't know, that kind of, you know, collaborative, loose, you know, construction, a bunch of people coming together, making this thing, you know, 4 lead singers, right? And everybody kind of taking turns. So I think it was kind of trying to be a reflection of the collaboration. And for me, it was also about the artwork. I'm not often super visually oriented. It tends to be an afterthought. I like good art, but I'm not a visual artist. And this is the only project I'm like, oh my God, WPA. And I was like cataloging, downloading all these posters. So the artwork for it, I found all the old WPA posters and kind of made these really bad templates for how an actual artist could reconfigure them and make a poster for each and every song, like based on all the old WPA, because it's all public access as well. Like it's the people's stuff. And so it felt so great to know that there would be this aesthetic that you could just roll out indefinitely. There was so much material in there, and that felt really exciting to me.
It's a great record. That is my sweet spot. I really, really enjoy that.
It was so fun to make. And I mean, that all came together. A lot of it was because of, you know, Sean and Sarah and Watkins Family Hour, which they've done over 20 years now. They came, the first time I met them, I had a show at Largo. Their first album hadn't even come out. And, you know, like, Nickel Creek, yeah, come, open up for me. They opened up for me. Everybody was floored. And then they sat in on like 8 songs in my set with no rehearsal. And just floored me. And they were kids, you know? And they were so astonishingly good and kind. And so Sean and Sarah ended up, when Nickel Creek was off tour, they did this variety show at Largo, and every Wednesday for 20 years, that when they're home, they brought in guest artists, learned new songs, and just, you know, the two of them kind of created this community. And eventually they had a bunch of regular players. Benmont Tench was around there when he wasn't out with the Heartbreakers. Like, there wasn't anything that was too far field for Sean and Sarah. And so I think for Benmont, it was incredibly freeing and fun. I had just played with Pete Thomas on my record, and he brought in Davey Farragher, and Greg Leese had also been playing in Watkins Family Hour. So, and then Luke Bola was still in Nashville. He'd, you know, grown up going to fiddle camp with Sean and Sarah. Amazing player, plays with Lyle Lovett now. Like, so it was such a fun moment to get to go in and have everybody be willing. And once again, with people that good, it just really spoils you, because you just start playing the song and it's like, okay, this all works. So I feel incredibly lucky to have been able to do that. And, you know, once again, in a situation like that, my job is just like holding on by my fingernails to not mess it up.
Hearing you describe the experience of coming back from the injury, segues me into something that is a common theme throughout your music, whether it's with Toad the Wet Sprocket or individual solo albums as Glen Phillips or with WPA. You know, I think there's a common thread of mindfulness that you can find in your lyrics. A lot of the fans of the music find their own version of spirituality in your lyrics. I wonder how that became such an important part of you, because you've obviously spent time focusing and nurturing that mindfulness.
I think I've always really been drawn. I don't even know how. I'm trying to think how to describe it here, because the word language around spirituality is odd, because it so often it can get tied up really easily into belief systems, dogma, and whether that's traditional religions or kind of new agey constructs or whatever. And maybe my shit's a new agey construct. It probably is. Like, I've always felt a deep desire to pray and a deep pleasure in prayer, and a draw to the mystery and the ineffable. I find a lot of joy and wonder there. And I think, like so many things, like my take on the ineffable is like, you know, if you try to describe the ineffable, you F it up. But this idea, like even in just the last like 10 years, I think I used to always say, I'm an atheist. And now it's like, I'm not a deist, because I don't think there's a guy with a beard who, you know, made the world and that we're the center of everything. I think I don't believe that. But I think humans are just bizarre and beautiful and wonderful and slightly disappointing, you know, things that happened, right? We're these miraculous little bits of matter that coalesce into consciousness. And thank goodness, because we get to look at the world and gawk and wonder. But there's something about saying thank you to the universe for bothering to be ordered in the way it is, for the fact that we find beauty and symmetry in the construction of things, that even at, you know, the root level of matter, there's such harmony and beauty to it. And it feels so elemental and elevating and strengthening generally to say thank you, and to do it in the form of art or song or prayer. It just feels right. Which doesn't mean I think there's someone on the other end of the phone who's going to shower me with gifts if I do it in the right way. I don't, you know, it's that odd thing of like the difference between a prayer of like, you know, a petitionary prayer and a prayer of praise, right? Petitionary prayer, you're wanting some mechanics of the universe. You're wanting it to come back to you in a way that's going to give you something. Or if you're in a new agey thing with a really warped understanding of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, you think you're going to somehow influence the quantum realm to create the reality you wish because the universe is your bitch. And there's just the other thing, which is like the Reinhold Niebuhr, like the serenity prayer, right? Which is simply asking for the capacity to accept what is and to be grateful for it. I have, you know, some irrational beliefs. I have a feeling that somehow love is the purpose. Love is at the core of everything. That love is somehow essential to all of existence. It's irrational and unprovable, and I don't have much more to say than that. But that, you know, when confused, it's probably best to choose a path that is more expansive and more loving and less judgmental. That part of music, and for me in the last 10 years, kind of post-divorce, like as my life was kind of collapsing, I found spiritual community that was kind of music-based, and ended up being very involved in, you know, community singing. I did some community choir leading in Santa Barbara for about, I guess, 6 years now, on and off. The kind of, you know, the lockdown put a wrench in singing together, but where when I was home, I've handed it over to this wonderful woman, Heather Stevenson, right now. I need to come back and do more, though. But, it's like maybe 20, 30 people, and we get in a circle, and it's people who, a lot of them have been told they can't sing or shouldn't sing. And there's this whole movement of people making these songs. They tend to be very short, fairly uplifting. They tend to have like two or three parts that are kind of interweaving, because non-musicians have an easier time with counter melody than with harmony. Harmony's more difficult to hold. And you get in a circle with people and you sing with and for each other. There's no audience. There's no performance. There's no us and them. It's making music like humanity mostly has made music for the last, whatever it is, 50, 60,000 years, 100,000 years, long as we've been human, right?
Yeah.
And which is not to say there haven't been songwriters and performers, but people made music together. That's what people did. And I feel like it's like symptomatic relief for modern culture is to go do something that's not a commodity you can't buy, that everybody's welcome in. I'm sure there are people who would come in and go, this is some woke ass bullshit. But it's, but for me, getting together and just singing songs is utterly transformative, and people get high as a kite just singing together. It lasts for days. I can't go to sleep sometimes after it. It's so freeing not to try to be cool anymore. It's the best. And so, like, for me, getting to do work like that has actually really helped me to go back and do the band and go back and do my solo stuff and look at, what's the purpose of this? It's to bring joy. It's to bring community. It's something we kind of forget. I think capitalism has a tendency to take anything medicinal and turn it into a drug or a product. I was listening to a podcast recently. I think it was 99% Invisible that was talking about, the 1942 musicians union ban on recording because record companies weren't fairly compensating musicians.
Yeah.
And there was the worry that musicians were basically all around the country being put out of work by recorded music. And they talk about other things like vocals weren't considered an instrument. So there were all these a cappella records that started coming out. So Bing Crosby with the big choir, that's because...
Yes.
The other thing was ukuleles and harmonicas, because those weren't unionized instruments. They were considered amateur instruments. So lots of records with ukuleles all of a sudden. In the same way that radio, when licensing started, and composers wanted and publishers wanted to be paid for the songs being on radio, that was when like the Latin music craze became really big on radio, because the Latin artists were unlicensed. And they were really happy to be able to tour in the States and like break in. But that's like why that big band Latin music came out.
That is an incredible story.
Yeah, it's like there are all these things that happen like that. But thinking of recorded music as like, on the one hand, I love album making. I love listening to records. I love that anybody can have great music in their head all the time. But what it also means is people don't play music as much themselves. It used to be if you want to play a hit, you play it. It's something you did in the home. It's something you did together. It was community building. You didn't have to buy a ticket for it. And like that constant co-regulation, singing, breathing together, dancing together, for free, was, I feel like, one of the most primary foundational elements of community. There's so much now that stands kind of between us and presence. And even for me, just remembering not to put these things in my ears and to go for a run, not listening to a podcast. Like, I'm an information junkie. And I'm also depressive, so I can get scared of being alone in my own thoughts. But when I run without anything in my ears, music comes out. Sometimes I come home and I have a few verses I need to jot down, but at the very least, I self-accompany. And like my rhythm, my body, it's good to remember how much comes out of silence. I have a lot of trouble remembering that myself. But anyway, that was the long and winding rant.
I mentioned earlier that there was almost a bell curve to the Toad career where you started off gangbusters. There was a drop off in a period of inactivity, and now you're back. And there was a new Toad record as recent as 2021. I want to call a specific song out because Glenn, I think you and I have a strong parallel in that we were both married very young, both have children, both found ourselves divorced around the same time, age-wise, and looking at the calendar. For me, the song Transient Whales it's an arrow straight into my core as far as the feelings that all of that experience brought. And I know it's a unique place to be. Not everybody goes through that, but you captured it so beautifully in that song. Thank you for Transient Whales, I guess is what I'm saying.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I miss calling someplace home. I miss thinking I could know where I would spend my final days. Plant a seed and watch it grow. I don't like waking up alone. Don't like cooking meals for one. I miss the chaos and the noise, the family work that's never done. Now in dreams I swim with the transient waves. All we have is each other and the songs we share, the songs we share. We are never standing still. The earth is spinning round the sun. The sun is swinging through the heavens. Time is always pushing on, but this body begs for comfort, and it groans with every change. Well, it hopes it will not suffer, prays in vain it will not age. And in dreams I swim with the transient waves. All we have is each other and the songs we share, the songs we share.
I felt like that was kind of like my last divorce song, if that makes sense. And even in the Swallowed by the New album, I was really trying to not write a pity party. What I got really curious about post-divorce, like I wanted to address the subject of loss and grief and change in a broader way. And I feel like that album for me, I think, is my most important album as a piece, just because of like the number of people, like for a song like Grief and Praise, is that it's like, that's a song that people play at funerals. And that's a song that I know, has been used in therapy, has been used, it's like that to me means a lot. And Transient Whales was, first off, the title, it's a song from the songwriting game that I play with Matt the Electrician. That title led me into this place where it was talking more about not like I miss you, not I miss, not about the relational part, but that what you miss is this third entity, right? There is your partner, but there is your family. There is your marriage as a unit that creates a container for whatever difficulties there are in the interpersonal relationship. That unit, having young children, having every day, like I still haven't figured out when I come back to tour what I do with myself. When my kids were young, like I just cooked them the best food. I love playing like an idiot. Like part of me feels like I've been just waiting for grandchildren for almost 10 years. Like that song was about, you know, this period, because it was also my kids growing up and the relation changing. And those times when, you know, the sad thing for me, you know, my youngest was still at home, and it's missing that, her walking down the hall and ignoring me. But being in the same house, and when I'm not in the same house, I can't even enjoy her ignoring me, right? And so, you know, that idea of, you know, mourning this other thing, like the family unit. And I hope that song applies, you know, equally well just to anyone who's got an empty nest, who's finding themselves in this like, oh God, we got a big empty house now. What do I do when I wake up? Like, what do I do when I come home? Like, there's all this, what is my even, you know, if you're still together, what's your relationship with the person you raised all these kids with now that it's just the two of you? And that's a stopping point for a lot of couples. Not everybody makes it through not being that family again, right? Yeah, it was a big one for me. And even that last bit of, you know, like, you know, who am I responsible to now? What's my community? What's my, you know, it's like songs going out to whoever's going to hear them. This very nebulous, distant relationship with life of I go where I go, I bring a little beauty, and I don't even know who's on the other end of it. So yeah, it's a good sad song. I like that one.
I was watching an interview with you, and you had mentioned growing up in Santa Barbara, you're on the ocean, and Steven Spielberg ruined swimming in the ocean for you.
Yes, he did.
For me too. I have been in the ocean since then, since I've seen Jaws, maybe a handful of times. I don't like it. Was that the inspiration for Walk on the Ocean?
No, not at all.
It's a cheeky question.
It's a cheeky question. No, I was a beachy kid. I especially with the nerve damage now, I just hate being cold, and the Pacific is cold, so I don't get in the beach. I don't go in the water, although a number of people have told me I will add a good 10 years to my life if I start jumping in the cold water every day. But nah.
We spotted the ocean, the head of the trail. Where are we going? So far away. Somebody told me this is the place where everything's better and everything's safe. Walk on the ocean, step on the stones, flesh becomes water, wood becomes bone. Half an hour later, we packed up our things, said we'd send letters, and all of those little things. Smile just the same. Seem late already. Forgotten we came. Walk on the ocean. Step on the stones. Flesh becomes water. Wood becomes bone.
Todd wrote the music on that one. I'd just been up to Do Bay in the Orcas Islands, and there's this, it's called Do Bay. It's this great little kind of hippie resort where you could, pitch a tent and camp, or you could go in a little cabin, and they have like right over the ocean, there's a hot springs where you just hang out, and, it's great. And I think that was in my head a little bit, but I don't know, I wrote it really quick. I rhymed things with things, which is a bad songwriting move. And I had no idea what the chorus meant. It was gobbledygook. It still is. And then I kept trying to rewrite it, and nothing else felt as good. So we just kept it. But that's that story.
You mentioned the songwriting prompt game. Mm-hmm. Toad had a record in 2021. You had a solo record in 2022 that, if my research is correct, all the song titles of that solo record last year came from the writing prompt game.
All the titles on that, and on Swallowed by the New, Held Up, Leaving Old Town. There's at least one other on that was from the game. I've gotten a lot of songs out of that.
Call the Moondust is a incredible song title. I love it.
Thank you. Call the Moondust is a fun one too. I really enjoy that. That's the best. I think the best expression I've had of like my spiritual versus my scientific, or my spiritual in accordance with my scientific kind of outlooks. My dad was a physicist, and on his deathbed, he was like, the last book he read was on string theory. And he was so in awe with it, just of how complex the universe could be, how unknowable, how infinite, that, forget about even multiverses and that stuff. Is just like the place you are in contains whatever it is, like 8 more dimensions that you can't even perceive, like these impossibly complex folded versions of reality that we're so small, that what we know is so little. And in that, he found something that felt like not necessarily an afterlife, but just, I don't know, that it, like for him, he was like, it's so complex. Like, I feel like God's in all of this. Like, it's unknowable. And I think it's a thing that, being raised by scientists, like that idea of wonder, and that every mystery, as soon as you find an answer, you may, especially in physics, everything you think you know to be true might be wrong, and that's actually exciting. That every time you find something beautiful and wonderful, you keep looking, and you're gonna find something else beautiful and wonderful. Like, it's the mystery and the awe never end. And so for me, that idea of the Planck length strings are in string theory, Planck length is basically the smallest that anything can be, and essentially still hold by any of the rules of physics, including quantum realm physics. So you can't get smaller than a Planck length. And so string theory is based on these super tiny Planck length strings that are like oscillating between dimensions. And that they move and undulate kind of harmonically together, which create the building blocks of quantum realm matter, which then builds the blocks of, Newtonian matter. And so that just to have the Song of God is strummed on Planck-like strings, and the angels drumming with their beating, pulling a little Rumi into there, this idea of everything being music, right? We come to the place where everything is music. Chris Delmhorst wrote a great song about that. And taking that back, though, even the book I tried to read on string theory by Brian Greene, the Elegant Universe, is
I read that book,
but there's one of the chapters, is everything is music. And so tying that back into, kind of this idea, I love the image that everything is just a never-ending, constantly improvised, always expanding song. It's all harmony. It's all things dancing and improvising around each other, and even consciousness, even, whatever. And there's something about that, like, feeling so suffused with awe that it kind of doesn't matter that you're a very tiny thing with a very short life.
It's what Einstein described as spooky action at a distance.
Nice.
On that note, I want to wrap up, but I do want to thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn, for the music and the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me in. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Glenn. Take care.
All right, take care.
Many thanks to Glen Phillips for his time, his stories, and his music. Special thanks to Marco DeSantis of Popsico for connecting Geoff and I with Glenn.
Our theme song is Rocket Sled by Blip. Abandoned Albums was recorded at Thunder Love Studios.
Produced and written by Keith R. Higgins and Jeff Calhoun.
Engineered and mixed by Steve Beasley with the help of Mike Hunt. Edited by AJ Royce.
You heard a lot of songs during this podcast, so I'll give you a second to sharpen your pencil. You ready? Here we go. Fly from Heaven, Fall Down by Toad the Wet Sprocket. Fred Myers by Glen Phillips. Always Have My Love by the Works Progress Administration. Transient Whales by Toad the Wet Sprocket. And lastly, Walk on the Ocean by... Do I really need to say it? You can stream all of Glen's work, his solo albums, his collaborations, and his work with Toad the Wet Sprocket, wherever you stream your favorite music.
Original music by Mike Pellegrino.
Be sure to check out our show notes for links to everything, well, not everything, but a lot of things that were mentioned during this podcast. If you like what you've heard, please be sure to subscribe and leave us a rating. It really does help. Thanks for listening.
At Twitter, we are at Abandon Albums, and on Instagram, we are at Abandon_albums.
Grazie. Bailey Leaf. Rob Janicki. Mike Pellegrino. Therina Vella. Ronnie Barnett. S.W. Loudon. Michael Janicki. Peyton Janicki. And our executive producer,
Rufus Thunderwolf.
And now, until we meet again next time, I remain as always obediently yours.
Abandoned Albums is a production of Paw Print Media.